The end of one year and the start of another is always a bit of a slow time. As such, when a literal nothing burger comes along, it becomes the talk of the town. Notably, this repo here, Audio Noise by Linus Torvalds. Now, you can go and do some weird funky stuff on GitHub pretending to be other users, but this is actually on Torvalds' account. This is from Linus Torvalds. Now, you may recall him mentioning in the LTT PC build video a terrible guitar effects pedal he was working on. This is some of the code for that project. Now, before we go any further, this is a hobby project. This is just playing around with hardware. This is not intended for production, and frankly, I'm kind of surprised he even bothered releasing this, because, well, he could have just kept it in his local system and he would have used it just fine. He's not trying to, bring in anything else for development or anything like that. It's literally just for him. With that being said, people are still opening pull requests and are still trying to, make positive changes to it. You're never going to have your pull request accepted. If you actually want to make a change, just fork the project and do your own thing. Not intended, but I just realized as I am filming this, Torvalds is actually currently working on the project, which is kind of neat. Now, there are two parts in particular that people have been latching onto. Two parts which people have been extrapolating out to mean far, far more than they actually mean. The digital RP2354 and TEC5112 bass guitar pedal actually does work, even if I'm not thrilled about some of my analog interface choices, i.e. the pot in particular, and I'm growing to hate the clicky foot switch, even if I do love how it also doubles as a boot select switch for programming. That is, what a great way to change a boot device. But while the hardware design is archived, while I ponder the mysteries of life and physical user interfaces, I'm still looking at the digital effects on the side, but right now, purely in a synth it all digital, let's simulate it and not worry about the hardware so much. Now, the important part is at the bottom. Also note that the Python visualizer tool has been basically written by vibe coding. I know more about analog filters, and that's not saying much, than I do about Python. It started out as my typical Google and do the monkey see, monkey do kind of programming, and then I cut out the middleman, me, and use Google Anti-Gravity to do the audio sample visualizer. Now, Anti-Gravity, in case you don't know, is another one of these AI-powered IDEs, and I do like this visual effect. This is neat. Some web dev had a lot of fun doing this and probably wasting an afternoon making this effect. This is based on the thing that every single editor is based on right now, VS Code. Microsoft has so much visual market share just by how they have developed this tool. You see an IDE, you see a code editor, and it's just VS Code. Basically, it just has this AI code development, AI agentic nonsense built right into it, and, it's another one of these tools. Nothing too crazy. And the other part is this. This is Google Anti-Gravity fixing up my visualization tool, which was also generated with help from Google, but of the normal kind. It mostly went smoothly, although I had to figure out what the problem with using the built-in rectangle select was. After telling Anti-Gravity to just do a custom rectangle selector, things went much better. Is this much better than I could do by hand? Sure is. Now, a lot of people are really extrapolating this out and really taking this to mean things, again, that it doesn't actually mean. Especially the last part. Is this much better than I could do by hand? Sure is. People are taking this to mean, oh, this is a better programmer than Linus Torvalds. Now, keep in mind, he's not a very active programmer nowadays. He's mainly in a maintenance role. But people are taking this to mean this is better than someone who's done years of development, who's been a maintainer for a long time. This is better than writing production code. This is ready to replace all of your production pipeline. No. This is a toy project. This is a project where he was focusing on the hardware. The software side of it, yeah, that might be interesting, but that wasn't the main focus. It was, hey, I want to play around with this hardware, and unlike the kernel, which wasn't intended to become something big and serious, like GNU was, this actually isn't intended to be something big and serious. This is literally just a throwaway repo that when he's done playing around with audio stuff, he is never going to look at again. He's not accepting patches. He's not expecting anyone to actually use this. This is literally just code that exists to solve a problem he has and nobody else has. This is not a serious project by any definition of the term. This purely exists for fun. And if he didn't vibe code the project, as he was saying, he probably, as he was already doing, just gets an answer from Google, copies the answer, and then it works well enough. But rather than piecing things together for an environment he's not really used to, he's not an audio developer. That's not something he's really like hyper specialized in. He's not a Python developer. Most of his development life has been in C. Rather than just going and copying things and trying to get them to work together in things he's just not familiar with, he was like, okay, this is not the thing I'm trying to do right now. I'm not trying to learn to write Python, learn how to do audio visualization. I'm just going to cut myself out of the equation and just have the computer do it for me, because he's not trying to solve this massive, complicated problem. This is a well-defined problem area in a popular language with a really common things you might want to try to do. If Torvalds seriously sat down and said, I'm going to deeply learn Python, I'm going to deeply learn how to do audio filters and audio visualization stuff, I have no doubt he could do it. He's an experienced developer. He knows how to read documentation. He knows where to find resources. He knows how to find examples. He could very well go and do so. But that's not what he wanted to do in this situation. He wanted to focus on the hardware, wanted to focus on the thing that he was actually having fun with. And considering this is a problem area where he doesn't have knowledge in, I have no doubt an AI tool that can write relatively competent code, even if it does have a lot of security vulnerabilities, probably could write something better than him in a state where he's not interested in learning how to write something better. And that's probably the case for most experienced developers. If I put you into a language that you don't really have much experience with, and for a problem area that you've never really looked at, yeah, you can probably work out how to solve that problem area, how to use that language. But before you go and do so, yeah, I can imagine that what you get from the AI is probably better than what you're going to write with no experience in a language and no experience in a problem area. Now, some people incorrectly think that Linus doesn't write any code at all anymore, doesn't write even any production code in the kernel. He does still write a little bit of kernel code, just very rarely, very few and far between. Mostly he's in a maintainership role. Nowadays, when he's programming, it's mainly just for things that he personally wants, for things that don't exist, or just having a bit of fun with it. And this project, this audio noise, this is just fun. Now, I've also seen the idea that, Linus is vibe coding, therefore the kernel is gonna be vibe coded, or vibe coding is gonna be a normal thing in the kernel. And this is just extrapolating an idea out of literally nothing, right? Yes, Linus is playing around with AI tools, but this isn't a new thing, and he's already spoke on AI tools and spoke on vibe coding a couple months ago, and I guess everyone either doesn't know or just kind of memory hold it. Linus is okay with vibe coding as long as it's not used for anything that matters, and you know what doesn't matter? This project. When it comes to AI, there is the AI crawlers and the usage of AI. Crawlers have been very disruptive to a lot of infrastructure, just constantly pinging. Most people are not very happy about that if they're in any position that involves maintaining this infrastructure. When it comes to AI-assisted coding, though, at least at the time, the author here thought that he wasn't using anything, but he probably was already playing with some stuff and just seeing what you could do. I'm sure people are looking at it even for the kernel codebase. So that actually is the case, and there have been some patches about bringing in some sort of kernel development rule set on how these can be used, bringing in some guidelines for the AI-assisted tools so they know what to do and things are done consistently, but there's not really anything that is like fully laid out where it's like, this is the exact guidelines, this is what you can and can't do. and a lot of it is probably going to come up to the individual subsystems. Regarding vibe coding, Torvalds described himself as fairly positive, but not for kernel development. Computers have become more complicated than when we learned to code and was typing in programs from computer magazines. Vibe coding, he said, is a great way for people to get computers to do something that maybe they couldn't otherwise do. Do you see how there's nothing out of character here? This is despite the fact that vibe coding may be a horrible, horrible idea from a maintenance standpoint. With developers getting laid off because of AI, Hondell asked what the impact will be on software development as a career. It's a complicated question, said Torvalds, and one that can only be answered in a few years' time. His opinion is that AI is just another tool, the same way compilers free people from writing assembly code by hand and increased productivity enormously, but didn't make programmers go away. Torvalds is looking forward to a time when AI is less hyped and more like the everyday reality that nobody constantly talks about. If you'd like to see that full interview, I will leave the link to the YouTube down below. It's about 30 minutes long. It is a great talk, and yeah, check it out. Now, to some extent, AI is already being used in the kernel, just not in the way that you might actually expect. I can't find the talk right now. If somebody knows which one it is, please let me know. But one of the talks with Greg Kroll-Hartman talking about CVEs being assigned in the kernel, he mentions they have this sort of a CVE assignment committee, this security committee that looks at these problems, and then each person in the committee uses some different method to verify if the problem is actually a security problem. And at least one of the people in that group does use AI for this method. Now, they're not the only person, and they don't have full reign on whether or not something is a problem, but it's part of that tool chain for verifying issues. And then when an issue comes along, they all vote on whether or not it is a problem, and that's that. And with a lot of companies very much being interested in using AI tooling, some of those companies, like Red Hat, actually being involved in the kernel, there is a lot of rallying behind having some sort of clear outline policy on exactly how things are going to work. A policy like this doesn't mean that AI is going to be doing everything in the kernel, but this is basically an unavoidable problem right now. And whether or not you say yes or no, you need some sort of outline on what you're going to do. When I don't have my lights on, you can really see how blue I have my camera set. Anyway, if you liked the video, go like the video, go subscribe as well, and if you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon subscribe Daily Bearer Pay linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and maybe one of these days I'll just mess around with my camera settings again, because it has been a while.